20-year-old defensive end that can play up and down the line of scrimmage and posted over a 17% pass rush win rate this past season is none other than Nic Scourton out of Texas A&M. So let's get right into it. Today we are talking draft. Let me give a shout out to our sponsor of today's video and for this NFL season. That is BetUS. Use code U2150 to get a 150% deposit match on your first deposit, 125% in the next two deposits up to $2,000. Use that as your sign-up bonus. Over here you can see that you can now make bets with BetUS on futures such as the NFL draft. So we can look at who's going to be the first pick in this year's draft. And right now, you can see Cam Ward is the favorite, but that's one that has a lot of buzz around it. I don't feel super confident in placing that bet, but it sounds like they're probably going to go quarterback. I love the idea of the value of plus 500 with a guy like Shedeur Sanders. I just think that's super interesting. Abdul Carter is also up here at 175, but that doesn't feel like great value right now. I don't know. They shocked the world and go offensive line again. Could the Titans do something crazy and stay at one and take Milroe? Does something wild happen? If you believe that's a possibility, this is the spot to be, man. Shout out to BetUS. Now, let's get to today's video. So today we're going to be diving into one of the top two defensive ends in this year's class from Texas A&M, and that is Nic Scourton, who's only 20 and a half years old with a 6'3.5" frame at 285 pounds. The flexibility is really there, though he typically aligned outside of an offensive tackle back in college, played a little bit more of that stand-up defensive end role, and that's how he'll probably translate to the NFL, though there could be some flexibility, especially on sub-packages, kick him inside. I think that's going to be very impactful early in his career as he works on polishing a lot of parts of his game that need that. But for a 20-year-old prospect, that's very understandable coming into the NFL draft that spent 2 years with Purdue before transferring to Texas A&M after his final season at Purdue, did 8 sacks, and then this past season with Texas A&M posted 4 sacks, but again, almost an 18% pass rush win rate this past season, while also stopping the run at a very high level, just being a playmaker in the backfield, but also all across the field. And you see that in some of the athleticism that he brings. A guy with this kind of frame, with this athleticism, this flexibility, will absolutely stand out when it becomes draft time. But the polish in a lot of areas do need to take place, and it could take a second to work that into the NFL. However, he does have skills that can be translatable immediately, like that sub-package ability to step in and rush the passer. I thought he was very effective when he lined at the 4-eye technique at Texas A&M. However, at a spot like that in the NFL, there'll be real concerns about, can he handle combo blocks? Can he handle double teams? Will he be able to hold his ground in these spots at the next level? There will be questions in those areas. Working on that, and his ability to step inside and have success as a pass rusher, which we saw at Texas A&M, can help him come along at the next level. Potentially slide into the back of the first round, so let's get right into it. And as always, let's start off with that first step explosion. And this is an area that I was pretty surprised when I walk away with a good grade based on his body type. I wasn't expecting this. He's not the most twitchy athletically. However, what he does do, and he doesn't cover the most ground off the ball either in terms of his depth within his strides, but he does play with aggressive strides through that first step and also working toward the quarterback. He also has an impressive reactive foot quickness. This is probably the biggest thing for me here, is his reactiveness. This shows up especially the closer he is to the ball. So those 4-eye techniques, he was able to get on blocks very quickly against the run, live behind the line of scrimmage in those spots. But even in the stand-up edge alignments, when he's out wide, if he's in a 9, his ability to get off the ball reactively at a good time was very impressive, and it was very consistent. It also showed up in a lot of different areas as well, because not only is that important against the run, but it's also important as a pass rusher to keep that kind of threat on offensive tackles. Again, it's not the most twitchy off the ball. Not going to see a lot of wins on the edge where he's just running by offensive tackles, but you will get is consistency in terms of that first step get off. Now, what I don't like is it feels like there's a little bit of a false step at times getting off the ball. There's a little bit of an unnecessary footwork that can take place, which feels like it can limit the actual first step that he gets into as a pass rusher. Have a ton of just natural burst or explosion from a stop. Love the lateral ability, the plus explosiveness when he moves laterally. That helps him a ton in terms of squaring up blocks when he's in those head up techniques against tight ends. Maybe he's in an on-ball press situation. He has to mirror a tight end with that first step off the ball and position himself right in front of that tight end to be able to maintain gaps because of that lateral explosiveness and the ability to create depth in those spots, even if it's not necessarily just leaning on the foot quickness, is an important factor into the next level. Again, with a guy at his size, where you typically think more often than not he'd just be falling behind gaps. Biggest issues I think that shows up as a pass rusher is he tends to play a little bit elevated. His pad level tends to be a little bit elevated. That can come into problems as a pass rusher that turns into a run play. Maybe he's trying to attack upfield, turns into a run play. His pad level gets a little bit elevated. I think it limits some shed opportunity as well, and I think it shows up a little bit off the ball as well. But he carries a lot of traits as a closer in terms of specifically as a pass rusher, but also as a run defender on the backside. That's between his length, the bend that he carries, and good long speed. Plus, he plays with fantastic vision against the run. He can be against the run. Like, there's a lot of things to like now about what he can be against the run, but when you polish up some of the ideas of the shed and the hand usage, then you start to really fall in love love with what this could turn into as a run defender at the next level. And I think that's going to be really the selling point here, because there's so much diversity of what he can be as a pass rusher, but there's so much that feels like it needs to come along, but it can absolutely get there. There's a lot of flexibility, but it's what he can be as a run defender right away, with even some of the issues that are still present, but also what it can turn into as a run defender, which can make him a full 3-down defensive end that's capable as both a run defender and a pass rusher, and that's not necessarily just easy to find. I think he plays with great football intelligence. Division ties into that a ton. It's to feel when he's in coverage, dropping situations, which shows you some of that athleticism that he has. He really just tracks down and takes away his receivers, and some of that reactive foot quickness that does pop off the ball, especially from closer alignments to the ball, and the reactiveness to get himself into passing lanes. I end up giving him a good grade in terms of first step explosion. Didn't expect that, but that's where I landed. Now, as a pass rusher, I also landed with a good grade here. And again, there's a ton of upside as a pass rusher, but in terms of what it looked like from a consistency perspective, you could probably also throw this in a lower category. It's just the amount, the sheer variety of what I think he can tap into at the next level, the sheer amount of potential that's truly in his game, I think is what stands out as a pass rusher, and that's what the team would be buying into here with Nic Scourton. First off, there's very noticeable agility, and again, at 285, you don't maybe anticipate that. There's agility within the hips, there's lateral agility. It shows up when he's a looper in terms of stunts, so he can work from the inside to the outside to the inside, which would be incredibly beneficial because of typically where he aligns as a stand-up rusher back in college. As a slant rusher, that's important. You'll also see it as a run defender as well, even though this is a different perspective, different point, but laterally, his ability to move and stay on top of like wide zone schemes, stay with blocks laterally as he's working through contact, it just showcases the kind of noticeable agility that he has. Again, it's not elite, very capable to opening up a lot as a pass rusher. He also carries real slither as a pass rusher, which again surprised me. His ability to squeeze through blocks, his ability to squeeze through in terms of stunts, to play and press close to the line of scrimmage, but also just works through the kind of the tiny creases. Haven't noticed a ton of guys, especially at this size, that I've seen that yet. I do notice that here with Nic Scourton. I think that ties a lot back to his bend. His ability to get himself skinny between the tackles is incredibly noticeable. He has that feel to get under punches, to get under strikes, to work around the corner. There's a smooth agility to his game. There's a smooth footwork to his game. Love the control that he plays with. One of the biggest standout traits for me positionally is going to be the body control. I think he's very good in this category. I think he's very good behind the line of scrimmage when he has to react to the ball, some of his foot quickness, and then also dropping into coverage. He's got very good control within his footwork to me. I think this really shines at the top of his pass rush. His ability to be reactive and adaptive to an offensive tackle's set, to react to that based on how they set, because he has the footwork that's capable of doing that, or also say he gets pressed out of the pocket, his ability to kind of stop and then work himself back into the play and not be completely squeezed out of the pocket, or even times when he's trying to bend the arc and he gets thrown a little bit off balance, but he still somehow comes up with a sack or gets a quarterback hit because of the length that he carries, but also that true bend inflection at the top of the rush. Those kind of things all stand out when watching him, especially for his size. He carries that great ankle flexion, which will translate to the next level, especially when you're working constantly against offensive tackles. That's necessary because he has a variety of ways to win. You'll get guys like this that come in with only like one way to win. It's like, all right, maybe he can win inside, maybe if he has the agility, otherwise it's going to be a lot of speed to power. And while I think that's probably going to be his best trait at the NFL as well because of some of the play strength he does play with, he does show the ability to win on the edge and to win on the outside, where if an offensive tackle allows that opportunity, does have the adequate bend to his game and also the agility to take advantage of those opportunities occasionally. He didn't do it as often in college, take advantage of them cleanly, and it probably will show up even less at the NFL, but he does flash the skill set to do it as that polish continues to work itself along and as his pass rush angles continue to improve, where he can really maximize his length and maximize the way that he presses offensive tackles to really help set himself up much more effectively than what we've seen to this point. Love the way that his feet continue to work through the hand usage, through the hand battles as a pass rusher. It's constant effort. It ties back to his motor, which I think is great as well, but his hands just continue to work, his feet continue to work around the arc as a pass rusher. I don't love that he's not super shifty. I already touched on this in terms of twitch. I don't think he's super sudden at the top of the rush when he's deciding, okay, I'm going to stick it, I'm going to get in the chest of this offensive lineman, I'm going to drive him back, I'm going to create a speed to power conversion, or maybe that's I'm going to step back inside and let me cross him over. Like, there's some fluidity truly there, and there's some agility to show some of that crossover upside, which again, it's pretty effective because he can lean through it and he can show an ability to get skinny. It's just not super sudden or twitchy, so typically guys are going to get hands. It's not going to be clean wins, but that is really impactful when you talk about that ability to step inside, reduce down against guards specifically, and he can kind of utilize that where there's a lot less ground that he has to deal with. We get to see some of that agility and some of that crease ability show off, and then because of his ability to continue to work through contact, continue to fight his hands, and continue to slide through, create half-man opportunities, opportunities, I think the interior rush ability to just at very least spill the pocket a lot is going to immediately show up in the NFL. I don't love how I feel like so often his pace can feel very similar as he's working the arc as a pass rusher. When he is working to turn the corner, it doesn't always feel like there's the second gear. Now you can see here that the benefit is he is able to maintain speed around the corner, but with shaky hand usage, and also you're going to see that he makes himself very vulnerable to strikes, you also see some of that bend at the top of the rush. And I think that's just part of his game, not having some of that burst or acceleration. I think he's a little bit more build-up speed than he is where it's suddenness. However, that could still improve by the angles, the way that he cuts himself off to offensive tackles to leave a little bit less airspace for recovery opportunities. I love the spin move that he showcased, and the thing that stood out to me here was there was a lot of variety of ways to get to the spin move. It wasn't the same process over and over. Now, I don't like that it constantly feels like it's happening in place, and there's really not a lot of get from point A to point B. He kind of feels like he's staying at point A once he works the spin move. But the upside of it is the way that he ties it along with his pass rush approach initially on the play. And this speaks to those counter pass rush setups. And it's because there's a reactiveness. And because he has the body control and agility to do it, and also the constant usage of hands, you do see that ability to set up counters, to set up a ghost move into a spin, or here comes a two-handed chop into the spin move. There's a variety of ways for him to play off of an offensive tackle to work that spin move and still have it be effective to then work to the quarterback. And he plays with fantastic balance through it. He just doesn't really cover much ground. It just happens kind of in the same spot. Skip club move, though that was wildly ineffective in terms of actually getting himself free from an offensive lineman. Way too often he just became latched in those spots and he didn't win nearly enough. You did get to see the skip through was effective enough. You saw some of the agility to kind of lean through, but in terms of getting himself free from the hands, that didn't show up nearly enough. We'll touch on that here a little bit more in a second. One problem for sure was his ability to create space from offensive linemen. Again, to me, you see that more so in kind of the side steps. You see that in some of the lateral movement that he would try to utilize as well as a pass rusher. He was a little bit more heavy in his feet, so again, it wasn't as shifty or as sudden through, okay, I'm going to press and then I'm going to work back outside. Here's the distance I can create. There wasn't a ton of distance there, but it's working those crossover, those sidestep moves where he didn't create much space. And even you would see with his hand usage in some of the skip steps specifically, which he loved to get to because it was a pretty smooth process, he didn't create much space. And again, I think that's partially back to angles. I think he leaves himself way too wide. He becomes too much of a reacher, especially we saw that against Notre Dame where a couple times he got himself kind of folded trying to get into his long arm attempts. It felt like he was completely reaching. It minimized the heck out of his length and he would just get himself caught on the ground. And even here, I love the reactiveness. You're kind of going to get that speed chop, try to work the edge as the tackle sets. But when a tackle would get set early in the rep and he'd have to work up into that offensive tackle, you saw a lot less decisiveness, a lot more indecision, a lot of choppy footwork, a lot of hesitation. His entire pass rush approach would just slow way down. And I think this also played out against short sets. The inconsistency to beat offensive tackles on short sets here was very noticeable. His outside approach was just less effective. He didn't show that kind of wiggle to get around the edge or some of the shake at the top of the rush. And that's when things would stall out and he would get lashed way too early, maybe not with an inside counter or an immediate bull rush approach. But it also shows up where there's some limitations, I think, there as well to have that shiftiness to create space consistently. And again, against offensive tackles, their athleticism in the NFL, I think if anything, that's going to be a little bit worse. So I think there's ways to improve that, but I think there's truly limited upside there where he's going to have to be a guy that has to be able to win more consistently through half-man opportunities, through speed to power conversion, just because he doesn't have some of the quickness to get the edge constantly. He does show some of the bend, but he doesn't have the edge quickness to constantly get there off the line of scrimmage and constantly make that a threat. So he's going to have to win more of those opportunities of speed to power conversion opportunities that he gets into. And a positive there is he sells it incredibly well upfield. He'll work his discipline pressing upfield, the aggressive strides that he utilized, and also I think an adaptive ability, right? There's an adaptive ability to an offensive tackle set this way, let me try this. And because of his footwork, he can do that. He can be reactive on the play. There's an instinctive feel to him as a pass rusher that also plays, I think, with fantastic vision for constantly finding the football. Does also have the athleticism, typically the flexibility, to also maintain speed as he continues to work around the edge. For me is he's way too often leaves his chest exposed. He leaves himself open for strikes and for opportunities to get latched and kind of lose a rep early. There's not a lot of separation through those counters that get set up later on the play, which we'll touch on here in a second, so that can really lead to a problem. Flexibility is key. There's some flexion within the core as well to kind of twist and work his way around blocks. You see it within the kind of the speed chop to swipe move around the edge as well, that ability within the core to kind of be flexible and just get himself a little bit wider away from offensive tackles as long as he doesn't constantly constantly leave himself exposed to getting latched and making himself too much of a target. I also think back to the suddenness there with some of the angles of not clearing and covering enough ground, where he'll be a little bit predictable kind of into the pass rush set. And you saw it against Missouri, right? Missouri constantly settled down, created great anchors against him, and it just felt like it was taking too long to get to that spot where it's like, all right, speed to power, here I go. The offensive tackle had a great opportunity to set himself down before the contact even took place. It wasn't like there was enough ground covered. Even if he made the correct read of how the offensive tackle was going to set, or there was a disciplined approach getting into it, I don't think he constantly played close enough, so he got himself into reaching opportunities where then it took an extra step to get there. It also turned into losing momentum through the speed to power, where he would just lose some gas working through it because of that. And again, then you get some of the lack of suddenness and twitch into those point of attack spots where you're just not going to have that. It has to be much cleaner as a pass rusher to, again, open up more half-man opportunities, because there were too many cases where speed to power turned into the offensive tackle would set and he wasn't in a great position to actually win. Bull rush leverage could be a little bit too upright. That was another problem that I noticed, is I thought that he just didn't play with always a constant leverage. This shows up as a run defender as well, just being too upright. But there's truly looseness within his game, and that's probably the biggest thing that I think is going to translate really well for a guy at his size, is the looseness that he can carry. I think this Arkansas game was a perfect example of some of the concerns, and also why he's slightly above average as a pass rusher, but there's a long way to go. And it's an example like this where offensive tackle has to deal with an inside pass rushing presence, so because of that, he's late to get out wide and set himself down. And that allows for Nic to be aggressive, and he attacks and he presses aggressively to the offensive tackle with that outside sidestep, and now it's effective, and you see some of the bend, you see the close, which is very impressive here. The problem is when this isn't a threat out wide, how consistent can he be to win? There's a lot of polish that needs to take place. So again, insides, loops, slants, that stuff feels like it's going to translate immediately, but there's a lot of growth that needs to take place. I don't think he uses his hands incredibly well, and we'll get to this in terms of some of the push-pull opportunities. He doesn't feel like he has any kind of length, like he's playing with any sort of length in those spots. It doesn't feel like he's playing with much leverage whatsoever either, and that leads to those opportunities where he gets latched and the pass rush attempts kind of just end. I think he's a good pass rusher. There's so much upside here in terms of what he can actually do and what he can actually bring for a guy at his size. There's true speed to power explosion within his game. There is an ability to build up acceleration and build up momentum within his game. And there's ability to set up opportunities to open up an offensive tackle and set up opportunities for shots into an offensive tackle. And that's massive, that he gives himself and he creates opportunities to have success. And he's able to be reactive and read through those opportunities. The problem is the execution isn't consistently there. Now, in terms of play strength, this is the weirdest one, because I think he has very good play strength right now. Again, I think there's upside here as well, but there's also real downside in terms of how does this foundation kind of come along, because what we got to see at Texas A&M was a lot of upfield, it was a lot of attacking approach, it was going through blocks, but if he has to stand his ground, what is that going to look like consistently? When we get to the shed and hand usage, because my knocks there are concerns about him actually being able to showcase the play strength that he truly has. It's the force that he creates when he's working downhill, it is his ability to play with leverage, and it's the hips to also work through kind of moving laterally while also still creating force back upfield. My problem is his anchor becomes inconsistent within his base. He gets himself a little bit off balance. It's not always the depth that you would like to see from the lower body specifically to hold his ground through a rep. I do think that he plays with real plus force through the lower body, and you'll see that within his hips that can get into it. Adequate bendability, I think, within the knees to set an edge a little bit more consistently at the next level if some of the other areas kind of get polished up a little bit. Laterally, he has the athleticism and the looseness to work over blocks through initial contact and continue to work on plays, continue to get back into plays, and not just get sealed off and have a pass rush end because he can't work through it or he can't work over it. Instead, all he can do is work through it. He can actually do a little bit of both. Really like him on the backside of run plays. Just as a side note here, the discipline shows up. I think the wide base, the footwork, the body control shows up on the backside of run plays, on the backside unblocked up plays in pursuit. I think all of that does show up at a pretty good level as of now. He also carries good core strength to his game as well to shed blocks. I think his play strength is very good. I just don't think that the play style and technique constantly showcases that as a run defender or as a pass rusher that you want to see right now. But truly, does he have that play strength? I think he definitely has very good play strength. The biggest concern is going to be handling combo blocks, handling those things when he's a little bit closer, right? When he gets kicked inside. When he's out on the edge and he can go one-on-one with the tackle, I think it's a little bit less of a concern, but especially if he has to deal a little bit more inside as a big DM, maybe he's in a 5 technique, maybe he's in a 6 technique, and it's here's tight end and tackle. What does that look like consistently right now? I think that's a big question. Now, in terms of the ability to shed blocks, I actually ended up with an average grade as of now, and I feel like in some ways I kind of bumped this. Like, for example, I think his vision to find the ball is very consistent. I think that shines. I think the energy shines when you see him in those spots, but there's a lot of knocks that I have here. First off, getting sealed on run schemes, kind of falling behind the gap with just his entry approach is just not right on the play lane, he gets fell behind, he gets caught in a spot where he gets sealed off on run plays. He does carry that lateral footwork. It just can allow him to continue to work against zone blocks specifically, which is key in today's NFL. But his base, to me, is not consistently square into the point of attack. Sometimes it's staggered and it doesn't set him up very well to be able to maintain his ground. He also can play way too tall at the point of attack and just come off with too high of a pad level, especially the wider that he is. I think it's pretty solid when he's in the interior because he's playing upfield. He can kind of dig himself in and drive forward. But if he has to settle in and kind of hold his ground, going to see that pad level is probably going to rise a little bit. So he's truly an upfield, aggressive, attacking style defensive lineman. That's where you want him because he'll live behind the line of scrimmage. And because he plays with that explosion in the lower body to create that kind of force that really carries momentum throughout his body. I think the best length, it feels a little bit underwhelming. Maybe some of that is the way that he displays it versus the actual true length that he carries. Show the kind of core strength to sustain through blocks. I don't always love the discipline when he's taking on pulling blockers, for example. I don't always love the approach to doing that. I think sometimes he kind of just peels himself out of the play. Doesn't actually create much of a foundation. So again, I think that's kind of a small example of if you ask him to settle down and hold the ground, you're probably going to get some inconsistent results right now just in general, but then also long term you could get some inconsistency as well. And then in terms of the hand usage, you see it, his push-pull opportunities don't really work whatsoever with the core strength he has and some of the force that he can create. Much success here. I honestly think you could give him a lower grade in terms of hand usage. If you want to say he was below average, I think that's fair. I like their consistency and the tight hands that he plays with, maximizes the force that he can create from the upper body. I do like that, but the entry to lockout on the edge is inconsistent as of now. Don't think he finds breakpoints well whatsoever, and you'll see this in a lot of his pass rush moves. Here comes the club or the hand swipe, whatever it may be, tied along with the fact that he leaves too much airspace for an offensive lineman to recover. It's also the fact that he doesn't get clean hand usage in terms of, oh, he found a breakpoint, now he's got himself clean. That doesn't show up much whatsoever. Too often, guys stay latched through those attacks. Doesn't feel like he's playing with enough force through his hands. He just doesn't find breakpoints very well. It's super inconsistent to get off of blocks. I love the fluidity within his hands and his footwork and the way that he tries to tie things together, that he attacks, that he utilizes both, that he'll tie two things together. There's the inside move and then here's the rip through to kind of seal the edge. There's always kind of a second effort, even with some of the dip and the lean, the way he kind of slips his shoulders. There's always something that's attached to the foot usage, which I love. And a lot of times there's a second kind of pass rush move with his hand usage strung together with the first approach. That way he can continue to work through the play. The problem is I just don't think he finds breakpoints whatsoever with any kind of consistency. His timing with his hand swipes, I think, could be a little bit off. It's fine with his footwork, but in terms of the approach for offensive linemen, the timing feels off. Sometimes it feels like it's super predictable. Other times it just feels like it's incredibly late and it's not impactful because he already got latched up and then he does not find a breakpoint to actually get off the block. The positive here is there is a lot of strength that he continues to work through. So even though that initial hand usage isn't great, the ability to continue to work through his hips, find eventually a way to get himself free and continue to work through reps is incredibly noticeable. But to me, that's less about the hand usage and more about everything else within his game. I do like the variety here. He's to lose some momentum when he's getting into those bull rush opportunities as well, just based on the placement. He keeps tight hands, but I don't think it always ties together incredibly well with his footwork to actually create much force and carry momentum. A little bit slightly below average in terms of hand usage. I think there's just a lot of polish within his game that needs to take place, mainly in terms of ability to shed blocks, hand usage as a pass rusher, and a run defender. But in terms of some of the quality traits that he carries athletically, he checks a lot of boxes. Body control, very good. Agility is very good. I think he's a good tackler. I think he plays with a high motor. I think he plays with great football intelligence. I think he plays with discipline as a player, good discipline. I think he plays pretty well in space. He's a pretty freaky athlete for his size. I think his frame is fantastic. Although he is not built as thick and as stout in the lower body as maybe you would love, he does feel a little bit leaner there, maybe a little bit more top heavy. And I do think to that point, it speaks to the lean, it speaks to the ability to get an edge as a pass rusher, but it also speaks to some of the concern of if he had to settle down and hold his ground consistently. He's got good first step explosion, very good play strength. He's got a good pass rush with a lot of upside. Doesn't really have a lot of holes athletically. I think that there's a lot of polished weaknesses that need a lot of work at the next level, but it shows with how productive he was while still needing a lot of that polish to take place. Right now, I think this is truly an upside pick, right? You're not looking at this like, what is it going to be right away, but it's also going to be long term. The problem is the question is how much can he actually bring right away? I think he's going to be very impactful as a sub-package pass rusher. You kick him down, reduce him down, let him go to work. And I think as a run defender, while I think that can be very impactful early, there's still a lot of polish that's going to happen in that offseason to make sure that you can trust him in that spot. He feels more rotational as a defensive end. Do you kick him inside? I don't think so. I think I'd leave him as kind of a defensive end, like a strong side defensive end, and you want him in a more attacking scheme, get upfield, because I don't know that right now I trust him a ton at the point of attack, and also with his take-on technique, I don't trust that whatsoever right now, so I think there's going to be a lot of work that's going to have to be done there. So overall, there could be upside in those categories. I don't think he's built the best in the lower body, but he's also not slim. He's just just not super stout in the lower body. He's an attacking, upfield, strong side defensive end that as of now needs a lot of polish, but has a lot of athletic traits that you would like. So for me, I ended up landing with a 6.4 grade here as it comes to Nic Scourton. He's an intriguing player. We'll see how much a team falls in love with this piece. As of now, round one, maybe borderline, but a team, maybe they fall in love because of the upside that's truly there at 20 years old, and this could be a player that could absolutely exceed down the road what the expectations were at draft time. I'm going to leave it there. Nic Scourton, let me know your thoughts, comments below. Thank you for watching. Shout out to BetUS. Use that code YouTube150, and I'm out.